In the previous episode of this series, we looked at how COVID-19 is accelerating some changes in the economy and the workplace. We discussed the impact that could be unleashed on different categories of workers by the uptick in remote work, automation, and artificial intelligence. We also looked at the fight for one fair wage for tip service workers who receive sub-minimum wages, and we wondered how policymakers should think about responses and solutions that make for an equitable economy. Coming up on this episode, we will be looking at independent contractors and the gig economy. Gig workers are short-term, temporary, or independent contractors for one or more employers, as opposed to having a traditional full-time job with a single employer. Deciding on the best way to regulate gig work has become a prominent policy debate, especially with the rise of delivery and ride-hailing services like Uber, Lyft, and Instacart. Gig workers in the United States enjoy flexibility and some convenience, but they lack basic benefits and rights, which puts them in a precarious situation in times of personal or societal emergencies, as the pandemic showed. How do we fix that? And how do we make sure that regulation does not end up hurting those it seeks to protect? Could there be a third way that takes care of the interest of all stakeholders? And what shape should that take? As always, a lot is riding on policy. My name is Stanley Azuakola. Welcome to episode 2 of the Future of Work in a post-COVID-19 world.
The future of work is going to be flexible.
The future of work is likely to get better for the majority of people, assuming we have the right policies in place.
I think the future of work is going to be remote.
The future of work is going to be a revitalized and reimagined service sector that includes just and equitable opportunities for all.
The future of work is going to be just.
The future of work is going to be full of opportunities for some and full of risk for others.
The future of work is going to become increasingly polarized between people with good jobs and people with bad jobs, between the haves and the have-nots, unless we work very hard to make it otherwise.
The future of work is going to be about our humanity.
The future of work is going to be unpredictable.
November 3rd, 2020 was election day in America. Most eyes were on the heated races for president and control of Congress. But something else was on the line that day in America's most populous state. California had passed a law that required companies to reclassify certain gig workers from independent contractors to employees. What this meant was that the companies would be expected to provide such workers with benefits and rights like health insurance, minimum wage, and collective bargaining rights. But some companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash saw the law as a serious threat to their business models. They spent more than $200 million backing a ballot measure called Proposition 22 to exempt them from the provisions of the law. And on November 3rd, voters went to the polls to decide.
And as of right now, NBC News is projecting that Prop 22 will pass. This allows Uber and Lyft to classify their drivers as contractors as opposed to full-time employees.
The companies won that fight.
With Prop 22 and, potentially other victories that will be forthcoming, and with federal regulations, I think what you're going to see is the gig workerization of more and more jobs.
The gig workerization of more and more jobs. To be clear, the gig economy is not just about those big tech delivery or ride-hailing companies. It cuts across different sectors and organizations. For some gig workers, the freedom, flexibility, and lucrativeness they enjoy is something they won't trade for anything. Asim Saeed runs a gig work platform in Chicago which provides physician staffing services.
I'm a big proponent for independent contractors. I think independent contractors has created a world of, almost like survival of the fittest. I mean, if you're good at what you do and you're good at the service that you provide, then you're always going to be in demand. If you look at a lot of the successful independent contractors that are out there, I mean, they're never without any work. They're actually choosing and turning down work because they're in demand. I think as far as it is very rewarding because you make your own schedule. You work when you want to work. And on top of that, you're not beholden to a corporation or to a system which can demand and make you do things that you don't want to do. Secondly, the point that you raised was about, some people, and there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with at all that, some people will prefer to have, an employed position, have their benefits, and live their life happily ever after. And that's absolutely fine. They just want to do only the doctor work, and that's it. But the rewards on the other side is that, you will get paid a little bit more, and, that would definitely offset, sometimes a lot more, and that will definitely offset the loss of not having benefits, but you would have to get your own benefits.
Asim's view is a valid but rose-colored view. For many gig workers, the challenges posed by the current structure of the gig economy cannot easily be swept aside. Here is Anna Stansbury, an inequality and social policy scholar at Harvard, providing some context.
It's important to emphasize that when we talk about the gig economy and independent contractors, we're talking about a much bigger scope of the economy than what most people will think of. Most people will think of Uber and Lyft drivers, maybe delivery workers for something like DoorDash or Grubhub. But this process of basically treating workers as independent contractors in terms of the legal form has spread much further than what we think of as the tech gig economy, into especially sectors like delivery for wholesaling, into trucking, into transportation. And it's a huge problem. And I think it's a problem for two reasons. One is many companies are essentially treating workers as employees, but legally classifying them as independent contractors. I see this as essentially what I call a form of labor arbitrage, which is just trying to get around the rules in order to not have to abide by labor standards. Things like minimum wages, things like mandatory benefits, things like contributions to pensions, occupational health and safety requirements, workers' compensation for on-the-job injuries. All of these apply to employees, but not to independent contractors. So part of this is just a problem of legal classification that I think needs to be solved by reclassifying many of these workers as employees. But there is a broader conceptual question, which is, in some of these cases, independent contractor type work, gig work, isn't an employee relationship. And then how do we ensure that these workers have rights and protections? And I think it illustrates the problem that so many people in this country rely on their job to guarantee them not only a minimum standard of living, but also healthcare. Right. And the very fact that healthcare is tied to work means that a gig economy type model is going to leave people without healthcare. Right. And that is just unacceptable in a civilized society.
The tying of workers' benefits to employment in a single company has other ramifications. Number one, it's not good for cities. Companies that treat employees as independent contractors do not pay some payroll taxes and do not pay into state unemployment insurance programs. This can hurt the bottom line of cities, which could be left with footing the bill for the gaps in some workers' health insurance coverage. Number two, it is also bad for entrepreneurship.
I think there is something ironic in the United States, which prides itself as being entrepreneurial, and we have this bankruptcy system that allows people to be entrepreneurial, but that ignores the fact that you can't really safely, as a employed person, break away from your employer without sufficient advanced planning, resources, family networks, and other things, because the entire safety net is tied. So if you want to be more allow entrepreneurial behavior, including things like individual sort of gig-based work, but more generally, you need to have a social safety net that is sufficient to allow people to, take risks in a way that is not going to sort of endanger their future in fundamental ways.
This debate has been ongoing for several years. Papers had been published, conferences held, news stories written, but policy action was lacking. And then in 2020, COVID-19 struck, and suddenly, millions of gig workers around the country could no longer work due to lack of demand for their services, fear of contracting the virus, and social distancing measures to control the spread. Caught between a rock and a hard place, they were also not entitled to receive unemployment benefits. Then something unprecedented happened.
And breaking news to start right now at noon. People who are self-employed, gig workers, independent contractors, or have a limited work history can now apply for unemployment benefits.
The federal pandemic unemployment assistance program is opening up benefits to people who would not regularly be eligible.
The experts had always argued that it was impossible to provide benefits for gig workers. But in the midst of COVID-19, government created an unemployment assistance program which allowed gig, freelance, and self-employed workers to collect unemployment. And guess what? It worked. However, this government assistance is not and was never seen as a long-term solution. That's something that still needs some figuring out. When California passed the law regulating gig work, some gig workers who the law was supposedly meant to protect were among its most vocal opponents. Why was that? Because the universe of gig work is not homogeneous. There are a diversity of experiences lumped together in that term. And in crafting laws and regulations, policymakers need to pay attention to the different contexts, understanding that sometimes one size doesn't fit all.
There is definitely a difference between independent contractors that are listing their services on a marketplace, that are deciding their own terms, deciding which gigs to accept and which not to, at what price they will accept those gigs, how much they will work. But that is often the way that marketplaces for highly educated professionals work. And in that case, these people are really not being employed by the marketplace. But if the marketplace is deciding which gigs they take and how much they're paid for them, that strikes me as much more of an employment relationship where there is a power relationship between the platform and the workers, and that's how, of course, Uber and Lyft work.
I would break down the independent contractors to their skill level or to their qualifications. You know what I mean? So, for example, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference if someone that's billing at $100 an hour or $200 an hour. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference for them. But I also understand that these regulations will definitely help people that are coming in for, job levels that are paying them, $15 or $20 an hour.
So yes, work is changing and society needs to evolve rather than wait for a catastrophe like COVID-19 to force our hands. Regulation should acknowledge the new possibilities of work rather than being unyielding about current definitions of work. It will require the collaboration of all parties, policymakers, lawmakers, labor, and business to come up with a deal that provides portable and flexible benefits for workers. And remember, this isn't just about benefits, it's about rights too. I asked Asim Saeed how he would react if the independent contractors under him decided that they wanted to collectively bargain. He was not too excited about that prospect.
As a business owner, I would say that that's fine because there's tons of other doctors out there who are looking for work. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be beholden to somebody that's, or a group of people that are trying to take advantage of me. I don't have to be beholden to them. Has there been, if that had happened, of course, I would try to address it. I would try to discuss it with them. I would try to work something out with them. I'll try to find out what the issue is, why they're having that issue, and what we can do to, make all parties happy. But at the same time, believe me, I can also go out there and find 10, 20 more physicians ready to do it.
But workers deserve rights, including collective bargaining rights that don't rely on traditional employment definitions.
Currently under US labor law, you're only allowed to organize into a union and bargain collectively with the protection of the law with your employer if you are employees of that employer. So Uber drivers are not allowed to organize into a union and bargain with Uber. If there was a more flexible definition of who was allowed to organize and bargain, which I think is really important, if that was able to extend to independent contractors and able to extend through supply chains so that the janitors that are employed by a janitorial services company can bargain with the end company that they actually clean, I think that would also really help because it would enable workers to advocate for the things that actually matter to them.
The US House of Representatives was thinking along those lines in February 2020 when it passed the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, described as one of the most significant bills to strengthen workers' abilities to organize in the past 80 years. One of the bill's provisions would allow independent contractors to be given the status of employees for the purposes of union organizing. However, the Republican-controlled Senate chose not to consider the bill. The bottom line is that gig workers deserve rights and benefits that give them safety and economic security, in addition to the flexibility. These are not mutually exclusive outcomes. Companies like Uber are already proposing a so-called third way, where gig economy companies establish benefit funds which give workers cash to use for the benefits they want, like health insurance or paid time off. Now that's a start. More would be needed both in terms of the quality and quantity of the benefits and rights. But we cannot continue to kick this can down the road. It's something the new US administration needs to tackle head on from next year. As always, a lot is riding on policy. In our next and final episode, we would look at some policy solutions to ensure that even as work evolves, society leaves no one behind. But that's all on this second episode of The Future of Work in a Post-COVID-19 World. My deepest appreciation to the MPA Program at the Colin Powell School of Civic and Global Leadership at the City College of New York. Special thanks also to all the guests on this episode who shared their time and insights with me, and to Fatma Ashraf, my supervisor. My name is Stanley Azuakola. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.